Thank you, Ljupka, for presenting the program. I'm super happy that we are, this is the first year nationally that we're also participating in a program as a country, and really great opportunity for all of the entrepreneurs who have an impact as a key part of their scaling and growth path. And for me, one of the biggest learning we had like a couple of months ago when we actually were training for the program in Geneva was actually, the whole context of, having businesses who are actually solving the problem at the same time, but also making a good profit margin and a new way of generally scaling and launching things. So next 15-ish minutes, we're going to be actually covering that on this panel. So also joining the stage are Tony and Antony. So maybe giving you a few minutes, guys, to present yourself. So,
hi everybody. I'm Antony Sheehan. I'm as with Tony, we're both UK-based defibrillators. I'm on my third venture, I think, at the moment. Working with the emergency services to use drones to deliver cardiac defibrillators to cardiac arrest patients, which is an interesting challenge. It's going to take a few years to crack, but we'll get there. Alongside that entrepreneurial activity, I spend, along with Tony, a couple of days a month advising the UK government on a program called the Global Entrepreneur Program that encourages and supports international entrepreneurs that want to bring their business to the UK. And they may be doing that to access the market, they may be doing that to raise money, they may be doing that for, because they want to build a base there and base their IP and grow to a global venture from the UK base, whatever the motivation might be. What the UK government does is make people like Tony and myself available to support them on that journey. So that's opening up our own networks, guiding them on investor readiness, making intros to investors, as well as opening up the doors of government for visas and tax and banking and all the things that they can support them with. On that program, we get to do a couple of things. I mean, we've helped, I think, over 1,000 companies, not just me and Tony, there's about 12 of us. About 1,000 entrepreneurs have come to the UK with our support over the past 5-6 years from all different sectors, all different markets. But we do get a chance to focus on both geographies that we think are particularly interesting and sectors and niches that we think are particularly important. And one of the reasons it's so good to be here is, we picked Serbia and the greater Western Balkans as one of the emerging territories that we think has a tremendous amount of potential in terms of entrepreneurial growth. So this is our third visit in a year, and we're already now actively working with probably 8 or 9 of the founders here in Belgrade to support them initially just on growing here and then ultimately internationally. And then secondly, one of the sectors and areas that we think is particularly interesting is sustainable development and the circular economy, which is one of Tony's specialities. So I'll hand across to him at that point.
Thank you, Antony, and thank you, Nenad and Gaia, for inviting us here. It's been a fantastic event, and it's really progressing well from what I've seen. I was back in Belgrade last April, just even in these 12, 13 months. It's great to see the progress made. I just want to ask, how many people here, if you put your hands up, are actually entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs? Great, so there's at least half there. Well, I'd say Ljubka just presented probably the most important presentation you're ever going to see, because this purpose-driven, sustainable development goal type focus is the biggest trend happening right now. First of all, it's just good to do, because we always want to do something good in our lives. But secondly, there's such a big momentum behind this that all investors, corporates, consumers, governments, for the next 30 years, is going to be fundamental to everything that we do. And it's going to get just more and more important, because as climate change affects, as health issues affect, as all these crises come to us, regulations are going to change, and the whole way we approach capitalism is going to actually change. So the reason why even the biggest investors, and no such thing as just impact investing, is all investing is focused on impact now. Even BlackRock and Larry Fink is just saying everything has to be a social impact approach, because the companies that do that and have purpose, from the smallest startups right through to the biggest corporates, have better resilience, have been proven forensically to have better performance. So what I saw is there is something here which is an understanding of technology. There's some good AI, machine learning, there's some good blockchain initiatives, but that's developing everywhere. Every country, bigger than yours as well, has these opportunities. What I'm missing a little bit, and I think what you just heard today will maybe give you that North Star to focus on, is I'm missing the focus on the right problems. So I like Mr. Asthma there is a good stuff. You just have to aim bigger, and we're going to help you with that. But generally, think about all these areas. As Ljupka said, they're interconnected. But that hopefully will give you the areas where you should apply your emerging technology skills to actually solve a problem. And then you can bring in all the stuff that Bob and Bill and Frank were talking about, which is all your growth capability stuff. So no, I'm very excited. This is an area I'm very passionate about. And if you can focus on this and remember this, I think it'll be a very good opportunity for you.
So thank you, like you gave me a really great intro to the next question. That is like one of the key points that we usually see on the ground working entrepreneurs is like they put like either or. So they like go to saying, okay, I want to do business, so I'm in for making money, and then I'm going to do regular kind of investment logic, and then I want to do good, so I'm mostly coming either from NGO work or some kind of a old school way of thinking of doing good things. So now we're definitely changing the whole market perspective and actually the opportunity of seeing that more and more companies actually see the big market of opportunity in doing good, which is also then good because there is more good being done at the end of the day. So how would you highlight, and maybe starting from Ljupka, the scaling of impact, the whole context of scaling the impact, and maybe sharing a bit more on a PP example, because they have such a great story on how they actually, through the program, expanding their market potential and did different kind of research of opportunities that might grow even exponentially in the next years.
You can also use the other one, actually. So I think that division doesn't come so much from the entrepreneurs, because I realized that the entrepreneurs that we work with, when they come to the program, okay, there are extreme examples, but some of them didn't know that they're tackling the sustainable development goals. Basically, they try to solve a really pressing problem in their context, and so it turns out that it's part of the sustainable development goals because it's an important problem. It was mapped there. The entrepreneurs we work with, and I think this is the problem, that when we use the vocabulary and what it means in different contexts. If you noticed, I didn't use social enterprise as a word, because especially in this context, social means something that is supported by the government or that is subsidized, or, there is like this bias towards what social entrepreneurship is. So we work with entrepreneurs that basically are solving a problem and they're making a profit, so they have to be sustainable. We have a few examples where they've started as a foundation, or they moved towards a foundation model. They just killed the business entity because they realized that's the way they want to move forward to create more impact. But usually we work with entrepreneurs that are very aware of that there is no binarity, but that it has to work together. And in terms of scaling impact, then the conversation and what we bring as an added value is just really thinking in wider sense, what does it mean to scale? A lot of people, when they come into the program, and because of the name of the program, they think about acceleration and the traditional understanding of just grow, more revenues, more numbers, push it forward. And what we try to do is pause and see what is really the change that you want to make, what is the problem that you want to solve, what is the size of that problem, and what is the best approach. So maybe it's not just about your team killing themselves for like 24 hours the whole year, but it's about a strategic collaboration, about lobbying, about systemic change. And I will give one example of also a circular a venture from Turkey, Whole Surplus. So basically they're tackling the food waste problem. They're connecting entities that have food waste with entities that need it, like food banks and so on. They've saved more than 360 million of tons of food in the last years. And so what they're also doing in terms of how they want to scale their impact, they realize that in Turkey it's cheaper to throw your food away rather than actually donate it. So how do you build a business model around that? You can't. Like your business model is inexistent. So what they did is they went and they worked with the government to change the laws to make it expensive for people to throw food away, and they succeeded. So that's the entrepreneurs we want to work with, those that like have the foresight to work on systemic level and systemic change rather than just thinking about scaling in terms of pure singular business growth.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think one of the things that's really interesting for me in this area is looking for different tipping points where things that start out as largely being driven by social benefit, and perhaps you are tapping into some public funds, you get to a point or a scale where it just becomes the most economic way to do things. And suddenly there's a lot of money to be made. And I think that's, if you can time it correctly and target those points correctly as a startup, you can do really well. And, you know, bigger picture example of that would be solar, where, you know, for years solar has been the right thing to do and all this other thing, but there was always a cheaper way of generating energy. Whereas suddenly now in large parts of the world, solar is cheaper than new coal and actually cheaper than maintaining existing coal-fired plants. And that's a really important tipping point. And across many of those goals, you can probably identify similar points that may be a year away, they may be 10 years away, but beginning to work around those and then explore the economic opportunities that they throw up will be really profitable areas for startups.
Thank you both. And speaking about the circular, Tony, like what are some good examples of, you know, niche creation and creating a completely new and different context for circular economy businesses that you dealt with in so fast?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we talked a lot about here about, you know, algorithms and artificial intelligence, and without subject matter expertise, you're not going to be able to train or learn this machine learning, and that's something which I'd like to see technologists and scientists or people working in things to do. So, for example, in mining or in steel production or in car manufacturing, before you even ship a product, 70–80% of the material is wasted. You know, and it's not. Another thing is, how do you design integrity or resilience in that product to last longer? How do you service that product to last longer? How do you refurbish that product? So all of these areas, there's many companies, many initiatives. There's ways in which, you know, as we heard about the food recycling, or whether it's plastic recycling, it's really developing. So there's plant plastic, which is a company that's been developing stuff and creating a much more efficient way of creating plastic bottles that can be biodegradable. That's been a huge potential, but it needed to change some of the circular economy for people to be able to give these bottles back rather than discard them. So, as Antony mentioned, legislation is changing, and you can also play a role in that legislation as entrepreneurs. Governments are listening more, not just this government. Many other governments are doing even more than countries around this area. So there are hundreds of examples. The key thing about this opportunity you heard about is it will give you access to corporates and big players that you wouldn't as a little standalone startup. So a lot of your customers will be big corporates, and you have to join a program like this, I think, to help you share best practice and have access to these sort of customers to solve their problems.
And maybe keeping mindful of the time, what would you say as a closing question, like, is the key value and the key perspective that enterprise who is, or a startup looking to have a scalable impact go for in the next phase? So usually what we're seeing locally here that they have validated it to a certain point, they are looking to scale up, they're thinking about the investment, and then what is maybe the key point they should think about in that stage from your own perspective in the sense of scaling both the business and the impact in a sustainable manner?
I think a lot of the discipline is very similar to what we heard earlier from Bill and people around, you know your customer. All of that still applies. None of that goes away. It's your business will be customer focused. You know, you need to sell. You need to make sure the product is appropriate and a fit. And all of those disciplines still apply. So I think it's all of that scaling growth mentality that we heard about earlier. That exactly applies here. There's not that much that's different. The only other point I'd add is as an ecosystem, and particularly an ecosystem that might want to, you know, attach itself to this area. The thing, again, for me that I haven't quite heard today is what's the one or two things that Serbia and Belgrade are going to be uniquely world-class at? So there's expertise and abilities across the board, but as Tony said, you can kind of go anywhere and start to hear the same thing. What really will set you apart is when it starts, and it will emerge anyway, but if you can jump on those things earlier and start singing about them, and people need to get bored about hearing how good Belgrade is at, you know, AI in health or AI in food production, whatever it might be. Not for me to tell you. find the one or two things that you really can be world class at, that you have great research, great entrepreneurs, great selling skills, so that even if you're in California, people will have heard of Belgrade for XYZ. I think that's a really important aspect of building that ecosystem into an international world class one. And this sort of sustainable development goals and areas within that might be a really good cue to take and build from there.
Yeah, I think you've got to go very narrow and very specific as a country, because you're a very small country anyway, and I've just heard any possible solution presented in the last 10 things, everything was unique. But just to go back to the question, a little bit of also what I heard is there's some emphasis on trying to prove something here. And when it comes to these sort of challenges, it's very much an enterprise solution, and you have to be globally visible from day one. So there's no point trying to prove something here, because this isn't really actually a replicable market for many things. So you've got to start thinking internationally straight away. You have to start maybe looking at accelerators internationally, start looking at funders internationally, and keep your R&D here, but commercially you've got to access markets and you've got to access money. And that's not really available here, won't be for some time. So just broaden your horizons a little bit and go for impact and go for internationalization more quickly.
I will be really short because I would really love to play the video of the entrepreneur in the end, because entrepreneurs are the most inspiring people usually in the room. For me, I think scaling is so much and talking about scaling is so much related to the problem you're solving, and what have you solved, how does your solution works, and who else needs it, you know? So it's not a game of imposing and pushing, but actually you've solved the problem that is so relevant that your solution is needed and that it's easy to replicate and scale. There was a conversation about how easy it is to replicate to another market, and as Devi also knows from our network, it takes a lot of work to redesign or adapt your product or organizational structure when you enter a new market. So problem definition and replicability and scalability from the start.
Thank you all, and maybe let's get the video played as a closing.
So if it doesn't work in the meanwhile, please visit our website, accelerate2030.net, and there's serbia.accelerate2030.net, and our social media channels on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can find a lot of inspiring stories from a lot of inspiring entrepreneurs, a lot of them working with circular economy models. Is it working? Oh, okay. It's really not working. It's not
working. Okay, definitely not. We'll send you the video. Thank you guys so much for joining the panel, and thank you. Now we're slowly moving to the last block. So basically, we are going to have two groups happening in parallel. So here, we're going to have a go-to-market strategy with Michelle. Michelle, feeling ready? Yeah? Definitely. And also in parallel, we're going to have in lobby the self-hosted one-on-one mentoring. So all of the mentors, of the speakers and experts you have seen so far today will be available in next block for a conversation with startups on whatever you feel like hasn't been covered today. So make sure to grab a person. We're going to have like a 5-minute short transition, so you can grab your mentor, and then we're continuing here with go-to-market strategy with Michelle. Thank you.